She was a devoted mother, raising her daughters the best she could, never imagining that the person plotting her murder wasn't a stranger, but the child she kissed goodnight. What drives a 14-year-old girl and her boyfriend to turn their home into a crime scene and make her own mother vanish? The sky over Stockholm was gray that morning, hanging heavy as though it knew the weight of the story that was about to unfold. A quiet street lined with modest houses, neat gardens, clean fences. The kind of place where nothing truly bad should ever happen. But behind one of those perfectly ordinary doors was a family, fractured by time, grief, and secrets. A family already teetering on the edge long before anyone realized. Maria had never imagined her life would come to this. She had always been the kind of woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders with a brave smile, doing whatever it took to protect her daughters. Her first marriage had been a hopeful beginning. Young love, a charming man who promised her the world. Together they had Mary, a spirited, curious child with deep brown eyes that once sparkled with innocence. But life has a cruel way of rewriting happy stories. Illness crept in like an uninvited shadow. Maria's first husband grew weaker with every passing day. The laughter that once filled their home slowly drowned out by the hum of medical machines and the suffocating silence of waiting rooms. By the time Mary was barely old enough to remember her father's voice, he was gone. Taken. Death doesn't knock, it just steals. And Maria was left with a child. And a hollowed heart. But life doesn't pause for grief. The world keeps spinning, cold and indifferent. Over time, Maria did what she always did. Survive? She pieced together a new life. Found love again. George was different. A gentle man. A baker who worked at a local shop in the town. He brought with him not grand promises, but quiet comfort. The smell of warm bread. A steady hand. Someone who could soften the sharp edges of her sorrow. With George, Maria found a flicker of hope again. Together, they had a second daughter, Lucy. Sweet, innocent Lucy. The girl who would skip down the street, pigtails bouncing, singing songs that only made sense to her. For a while, the house felt full again. Not perfect, but stitched together in the way that broken things sometimes are. A patchwork family, but even the strongest stitches fray. Fate wasn't finished with Maria. Not yet. George left one morning for his shift at the bakery. It was supposed to be routine. Simple. A short drive, but routine became tragedy in an instant. A sharp turn, a crash, metal crumpling against metal, and just like that, gone. The smell of flour and sugar replaced by the sterile stench of hospital halls. A final pronouncement. Another man Maria loved. Stolen by the cold hands of fate. From that day forward, Maria stood alone. A single mother once more, 2 daughters, 2 different fathers, 2 entirely different worlds colliding under one fragile roof. Mary, the elder, never quite blended into this new family. A reminder of the past, of a different life, of a father lost before memory could even take root. And Lucy, the bright-eyed child who only ever knew the world as broken, yet somehow still managed to find light in it. Maria worked tirelessly, a government job by day. Culture head at the municipal office. Paperwork, meetings, and at night, a mother, a cook, a cleaner, a protector. Her hands were always busy, but no matter how hard she worked, there was always the creeping feeling, the subtle fracture within her family, that someone was slipping away. And somewhere, behind closed doors, in the quiet hum of a teenage girl's bedroom, that fracture was widening into a crack that would soon shatter everything. It didn't happen all at once. It was never one loud, obvious moment that told Maria her daughter was changing. No, it was quieter than that. Slower, like the way shadows lengthen at dusk, unnoticed until you suddenly realize the whole room has grown dark. Mary was only 14, but something about her shifted almost overnight. The girl who used to hum pop songs while helping set the dinner table had fallen silent. Her laughter, once bright, often loud, faded into mumbled replies and closed bedroom doors. It started with the phone. Always the phone. A device Maria hadn't even known her daughter owned at first. A cheap, battered secondhand smartphone that appeared as mysteriously as the change in Mary herself. Maria would catch glimpses of it under pillows, hidden between textbooks, or gripped tightly in Mary's palm when she thought no one was watching. Her thumbs would move frantically, eyes glued to the screen, face illuminated by the cold blue light, even in the dead hours of the night. Maria noticed. Of course she noticed. At first she thought it was typical teenage stuff, a girl growing into herself, testing boundaries, retreating into that private world all teenagers eventually create. But this was different. It wasn't the usual teenage moodiness. It was sharper, colder, as though something, or someone was pulling Mary further and further away. Family dinners became awkward rituals. Maria would cook Mary's favorite meals: creamy pasta, fried dumplings, warm bread straight from the oven. But more often than not, Mary would sit at the table with her fork pushing food around, eyes flicking constantly toward her pocket. Conversation dried up. Questions were met with shrugs. Smiles turned to blank stares. Maria tried to brush it off at first. Maybe school was stressful. Maybe she was struggling with friends. Maybe, as the cruel voice in the back of Maria's mind whispered, maybe she was failing as a mother. But the signs kept stacking up. Mary stopped attending the Saturday movie nights they once cherished. She no longer walked Lucy to the park, claiming she was busy or tired. Even the smallest interactions became transactional. There were nights, too many nights, when Maria would wake in the middle of her sleep and find the faint glow of light spilling from beneath Mary's bedroom door. Soft whispers, laughter, conversations too low to make out, but long enough that it was clear this wasn't a passing phase, this was an obsession. Then came the locked doors, the sudden violent snapping shut of her bedroom whenever Maria walked down the hall. The bathroom door slammed a bit too hard. The hiss of privacy screamed with a venom that left Maria standing in the hallway, stunned and breathless. Maria confronted her. "Who are you always talking to?" she asked one evening, trying to keep her voice steady, calm but firm. Mary didn't look up, didn't answer, just thumbed at her phone. Maria repeated herself, louder this time. Mary sighed, not guilty, not fearful, but annoyed, and said, "It's just a friend. Leave it, Mom." But it didn't feel like just a friend. Maria's instincts gnawed at her, whispered to her in the quiet moments when the house was still. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. A mother knows. She knows when her child is slipping through her fingers. She knows when the warmth of home has turned cold in one corner. And as much as Maria wanted to believe it was just growing pains, she knew. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't a girl discovering who she was. This was a girl, becoming someone else entirely. It all began, like so many tragedies of the modern age, with a message. An innocent ping in the dead hours of the night. A stranger's name lighting up Mary's secret phone screen. His name was John, 19 years old, a small-time DJ who worked at a local pub on the other side of town. Someone who, by every definition, should never have crossed paths with a 14-year-old girl. But the internet doesn't care about boundaries. It doesn't care about lines drawn between right and wrong, safe and dangerous. In the glow of a screen, anyone can be anyone. And in that glow, monsters can wear the sweetest smiles. It started harmless, or so it seemed. John found her through a social media app. Maybe it was the filtered photo Mary had uploaded, trying to look older, more grown than she really was. Or maybe it was the algorithms, those unseen puppeteers, weaving their threads and connecting two lonely souls for reasons that only seemed random. His first message was casual, compliments disguised as friendliness. "You've got a cool vibe. You look mature for your age." Simple, harmless, or at least that's how it looked on the surface. But Mary, already drowning in the loneliness of her fractured family, soaked it up like a sponge. No one had told her she was special in a long time. No one told her she mattered. No one noticed her the way John did. At least, that's what he made her believe. His words wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and intoxicating. Slowly, the conversations turned from hobbies and music to secrets and dreams. Private, intimate, a space where no one else was allowed. Day by day, hour by hour, their chats grew longer, deeper, darker. What started as light jokes about skipping school soon became fantasies of running away together. Mary began to believe that John was the only person who truly understood her. He listened when her mother scolded. He soothed her when her little sister got the attention she felt she deserved. He told her the things teenage hearts crave the most, that she was mature, different, special, grown. But the truth was far more sinister. John wasn't just a lonely boy looking for connection. He was grooming her. Slowly, methodically manipulating her perception of right and wrong, breaking down the boundaries that should have protected her. He filled her head with dangerous ideas about freedom, rebellion, escape, about cutting ties with anyone who stood in their way, including her mother. What made it worse was how easily it all unfolded behind closed doors, hidden behind passwords, shielded by teenage secrecy. The outside world saw a smiling DJ spinning records under neon lights, a harmless face in the crowd. But behind the screen, John's words were poison, seeping deep into Mary's fragile, confused mind. Their bond twisted into something obsessive. The line between love and control blurred until it no longer existed. John told her they were soulmates, that nobody, not her mother, not anyone, could keep them apart. And Mary, desperate for someone to fill the growing void in her heart, believed every word. What neither of them admitted aloud, but both knew in the darkest corners of their minds, was that this wasn't going to end with a happy escape. No, this was heading somewhere much, much darker. The messages started sweet, affectionate. A digital echo of teenage romance played out in emojis, misspelled words, and hearts sent back and forth in the dead hours of the night. Mary would lay curled beneath her blankets, her face aglow from the screen, whispering into her pillow as she typed back to John. They told each other everything, or at least Mary thought she did. But beneath the surface of their sweet exchanges, something far uglier was festering. Something that began as innocent rebellion slowly mutated into something insidious. At first, they fantasized about escape, about leaving everything behind. Mary would sigh through her texts, saying how tired she was of being treated like a child, how suffocating it was to live under her mother's rules. John fed it, every word laced with poison disguised as comfort. He promised her a future, a life without restrictions, a life where no one told her who she could love or what she could do, a life where it was just them against the world. But then, somewhere between the harmless daydreams of running away and the sweet nothings they exchanged, the tone shifted. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, creeping in like a shadow lengthening at dusk. The first time it happened, it barely registered as a threat. John had texted, "Wish we could just make all the problems disappear." Harmless on its face, vague enough to pass as frustration. But Mary responded quickly, "Yeah, if only..." 3 dots, hanging, open-ended. An unfinished thought that neither dared finish, at least not yet. Days passed. The texts grew darker. Less hypothetical, less vague. The frustrations about her mother's nagging transformed into complaints about how Maria always ruined everything. And John, ever the manipulator, was ready with his replies. "She doesn't understand you. She never will." And then, what if you didn't have to deal with her anymore? Mary stared at that message for a long time the first time it appeared. Her fingers hovered over her phone's keyboard. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but something else. Excitement? Dread? It was hard to tell. She responded with a nervous laugh. "Ha ha, stop. That's crazy." But John didn't stop. He doubled down. "Not crazy, just thinking. I mean, what if she just vanished?" Vanished. That word hung between them, more powerful than either of them was ready to admit. It wasn't phrased as murder. Not yet. No. Disappearing someone. That was easier to say, easier to imagine, easier to pretend it wasn't as monstrous as it really was. They began to talk about the details. At first, it was still dressed in the illusion of a joke. Could you imagine if she just wasn't there anymore? No yelling, no rules, just us. But with every text, every late-night whisper, the line between fantasy and reality grew thinner. John started asking questions. When's she home alone? Where are the sharp things kept? Do you have something to tie someone up? It was casual, chillingly casual, as though they were discussing what movie to watch rather than what life they were about to take. Mary didn't stop him. She never typed the word no. Instead, her responses grew shorter, but never resistant. I'll check. Let me think. Maybe. And behind those simple words was something far more terrifying. The slow, almost mechanical acceptance that this was possible. That this was happening. By the end of that week, their messages no longer danced around the subject. They weren't hinting anymore. The conversations were plans. Calculated. Step by step. What started as love letters had transformed into death notes. The sky was heavy that night, bloated with dark clouds that rolled in slow, menacing waves. Thunder grumbled low in the distance, like a warning. The world itself was whispering, but no one was willing to hear. The wind carried with it a chill that gnawed at the skin, hinting at the storm that was inching closer. Streetlights flickered against the growing darkness as shadows stretched long over the quiet suburban street. It was sometime after sunset when he arrived. John. His presence was like a crack splitting down the middle of something already fragile. He stood at the gate, hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his black hoodie, eyes scanning the house with a casual arrogance masked as indifference. The kind of demeanor someone wears when they've rehearsed exactly how they want to be perceived. Cool, harmless, unbothered. But beneath that exterior, something far more dangerous churned. Mary was already waiting. She opened the front door before he even knocked, like a signal had been exchanged silently between them. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the living room where Maria was folding laundry, oblivious for the moment, then back toward John. No words were needed. She simply stepped aside, letting him slip in like a shadow sliding across the floor. Maria noticed quickly, her motherly instincts always sharp, always watching. She turned, brow furrowed as soon as her eyes caught sight of the stranger in her home. Her voice was steady, but unmistakably edged with suspicion. "Who's this?" she asked, wiping her hands on the towel slung over her shoulder. Her gaze shifted to Mary, waiting for an answer she already suspected wouldn't satisfy her. Mary's response came too fast, too rehearsed. "This is John, a friend from school." Her tone was deliberately casual, as if John's sudden appearance on their doorstep was the most natural thing in the world. But Maria's eyes lingered on him, on the way his hands clenched just a little too tight, on the half step he took backward as if bracing for confrontation. The air grew heavier, both from the brewing storm outside and the tension now thickening inside the house. Maria crossed her arms, exhaling sharply. "It's late, and the weather looks bad," she muttered, half to herself, half as a reluctant acknowledgement of the situation. "Fine. He can stay, but he sleeps outside on the lawn. I don't have space for strangers in this house." For a moment, John's jaw twitched. Something dark flickered behind his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He gave a nod, feigning respect. "No problem. I get it." His words were smooth, practiced, but hollow. Maria didn't like it. Not any of it. But the storm was creeping closer. The sky outside cracked open with a jagged streak of lightning, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the rooftop like impatient fingers. She sighed, motioning toward the small covered patio by the lawn. "There, I'd stay dry under that. Just stay out there." As the rain picked up, a strange, suffocating calm settled over the house. The kind of calm that feels like holding your breath before something snaps. Mary closed the door, locking eyes with John for a split second. No words passed between them. But they didn't need words. Both of them knew. Tonight wasn't just about waiting out the rain. Tonight was the beginning of something that couldn't be undone. The rain poured heavier now, sheets of water cascading from the sky and pounding against the rooftop with relentless force. Thunder cracked closer, louder, like the sky itself was warning the world that something unspeakable was about to happen. Inside the house, the soft glow of a kitchen light flickered against the gloom, casting long, warped shadows on the walls. From the outside, it looked like any other family home bracing for a storm. Safe. Ordinary. But the truth brewing within those walls was anything but. Mary moved through the house with the mechanical stillness of someone pretending. Pretending that everything was fine, pretending that this was just a normal night, just a friend sheltering from the rain, just a girl helping her mother fold clothes while the wind howled outside. But her hands trembled. Her fingers gripped the edges of the fabric a little too tight. Her breaths were shallow, but steady enough to not raise alarm. Maria was too focused on preparing Lucy for bed to notice how Mary's eyes kept darting toward the window, toward the figure barely visible under the patio roof. John. Out there under the thin sheet of corrugated plastic, John sat cross-legged, his hoodie drawn tight, fingers tapping rapidly on his phone. His eyes weren't on the rain or the storm. They were fixed entirely on the screen as messages pinged back and forth between him and Mary, a silent conversation that carried a weight heavier than any storm outside. Is she asleep yet? Not yet. Lucy's still awake too. Tell me when. We have to do it. Tonight. Mary's thumb hovered over the screen as her pulse raced. She could feel the heat building behind her eyes, a prickling sensation of adrenaline mixing with the dread. Every fiber of her wanted to back away, to stop this, to slam the brakes on the monster they had been quietly building together for months. But then came John's next message. You're not backing out, right? We're in this, you and me, forever. The words landed like a stone in her chest. It wasn't phrased as a question. It was a demand. A binding contract written in digital ink. Her hands trembled as she typed back. I'm not. I promise. The decision. The final step. The moment where thoughts turned into plans, and plans threatened to become actions. Sometime past midnight, when the storm reached its angriest, John slipped quietly from the patio into the side entrance Mary had left unlocked. His shoes left small, muddy prints on the tiled floor, a trail of evidence not yet realized. Mary met him in the hallway, her eyes wide, face pale. There was no smile between them now. No laughter. Just the eerie silence of two souls standing on the edge of a cliff, with no intention of looking back. They whispered, their voices barely above the howl of the wind. Words sharpened like knives, discussing steps, where to do it, how long it would take, what to do if she fought back, what to do with Lucy. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just staring at each other, letting the weight of their choice suffocate the air between them. The line between innocence and evil wasn't blurred anymore. It was crossed. Fully. Completely. A point of no return. Hidden behind their masks of teenage rebellion, of misunderstood youth, was something else entirely now. Something monstrous. Something neither of them could ever take back. The morning arrived wrapped in a heavy fog, the kind that seemed to suffocate sound and blur the edges of everything. Rain still clung to the windows, thin rivers of water tracing patterns down the glass. Maria stirred awake to the faint hum of silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, but wrong. The usual morning sounds were absent. No shuffle of footsteps, no clinking bowls, no groggy teenager grumbling about school. The house felt hollow. It wasn't until Maria passed by Mary's room that her stomach twisted into knots. The door stood slightly ajar and inside the bed was empty. Not slept in empty. Cold empty. Sheets perfectly made, pillows untouched, no indent of a body ever having laid there. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. She called out her daughter's name, her voice tightening. No answer. Louder now. Mary? Still nothing but the muffled drip of water outside and the soft ticking of the wall clock that suddenly sounded deafening. Maria checked every room, growing more frantic by the second. The bathroom, empty. The kitchen, no sign. She flung open the back door, scanning the yard, expecting to find Mary chatting with the neighbor or feeding the stray cat that sometimes visited. But the yard was soaked and lifeless. The neighbor's driveway was empty. No movement, no Mary. Her first instinct fought with logic. Maybe she went for a walk. Maybe she stepped out early for school. Maybe, no, none of this made sense, not without telling her. Mary never left without saying something, no matter how strained their relationship had become lately. Even through the sullen glares and bitter silences, there had always been the basic routines, the rhythms of family life. But this was a rupture. A gaping hole where her daughter should be. Maria's hands trembled as she grabbed her phone, flipping through recent calls. Nothing from Mary, no messages. She dialed her number anyway, half hoping it would ring from somewhere in the house, that it had just slipped under a bed or fallen between couch cushions. But it rang. Once, twice. Straight to voicemail. Her chest tightened, breath caught halfway. The ringing felt like a countdown to something unspeakable. She called again, and again. Voicemail. A cold, robotic voice asking her to leave a message. Her fingers felt numb as panic wrestled against the last fraying threads of reason. Maybe she went to John. The thought struck her like ice water. The boy from the night before. The one she'd allowed to stay. Outside, she reminded herself. Outside. But her heart pounded louder now. Could they have left together? The thought spiraled into a storm of dread. She could barely think straight as she grabbed her keys, shoved her feet into shoes, and sprinted to the neighbor's house. Knocked. Pounded. Nothing. Back home. Checked again. Empty. Her mind felt like it was running in circles, breath coming faster, vision tunneling. There was nothing left to do. Her hands trembled as she tapped the numbers, dialing the police. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like her lips didn't believe what her brain was forcing them to say. My daughter. She's missing. She's gone. She's just gone. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced, asking questions that felt distant, unreal. When did you last see her? Was she upset? Did she say where she was going? No to all of it. None of this made sense, not yet. But something deep in Maria's gut already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a teenage tantrum. Something had happened. Something terrible. And the dread that wrapped itself around her wouldn't let go. The clock struck 10:30 a.m. sharp as Mary stepped onto the platform of the small, nearly deserted railway station. The air still carried the damp scent of the storm that had passed through the night before. The clouds above hung heavy, refusing to fully give way to the sun, as if nature itself sensed something dark unfolding. Her shoes made hollow echoes against the concrete as she walked, not in a rush, but with a deliberate purpose that felt unnatural for a girl her age. No backpack, no lunchbox, no trace of anything that suggested a girl running errands or heading to school. She hadn't left a note. No goodbye. No excuse whispered to her mother. Just absence. Cold, abrupt, deliberate. John was already waiting, leaning against one of the rusted poles that held the flickering arrival sign. His arms folded across his chest, his eyes scanning the space until they locked onto her. His lips curled into a grin. Not the kind that carried warmth, but the kind that hinted at mischief wrapped around something rotten. He straightened as she approached, pushing himself off the pole as if ready to lead her somewhere far away from the version of herself she was leaving behind. There were no greetings exchanged, no hugs, no words wasted on the pleasantries of normal teenagers meeting after a night apart. They were past that now. Whatever innocence had once existed between them had long since rotted, replaced by something sharper, colder. John nodded once, a simple gesture that meant, "Let's go," and Mary fell into step beside him without question. The walk to his house was silent, but not the kind of silence that comes from having nothing to say. It was heavy, loaded with the weight of decisions made and paths chosen. Every step felt like crossing an invisible line, leaving behind the world of rules, of consequences, of mothers who loved and worried. In its place was something else entirely, a universe they were constructing together, where anything was possible, even murder. By the time they stepped through the front door of John's house, the tension between them had shifted from anxiety to focus. His place was a mess of crumpled papers, empty soda cans, and cigarette butts crushed into cheap glass ashtrays. But there, amidst the chaos, was something disturbingly precise. A notebook spread open on the coffee table, scribbled with frantic handwriting and rough diagrams. Next to it, scraps of paper bore lists, checklists. Mary sat, her eyes scanning the page. There were bullet points, steps, actions. The words hit her like stones, not because they shocked her. They didn't anymore, but because of how real they looked in ink instead of floating as text bubbles on a phone screen. John paced as he talked, pointing to lines as if explaining homework. "We need to figure out how long it would take," he muttered. "She's not weak, she'll fight. But if we start with the cloth, like we said, it should work. Quick, quiet." He tapped his pen hard against a box he'd drawn labeled Plan B. Inside it, in shaky letters, one word: hammer. Mary's hands trembled for only a moment, but she steadied them. Her lips pressed into a thin line as John continued, his voice low, sharp, full of feverish determination. There was no laughter, no second-guessing. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was blueprints, logistics, calculations of silence and timing, a timeline for someone's last breath. The only sound filling the room was the scratch of pen against paper, and the silent, suffocating realization that there was no turning back now. The table in John's living room had transformed into something grotesque, not with blood or broken glass, but with something far more chilling in its own right. Paper. So much paper. Sheets crumpled and rewritten, diagrams with crossed-out lines, scribbles that grew darker and more frantic with every pass of the pen. Maps of the house. Arrows marking entry points, escape routes, blind spots. The edges of the notebook curled upward, worn from nervous fingers, flipping back and forth between pages of twisted strategy. John crouched over the coffee table, his pen dancing furiously across the paper like a blade being sharpened. His handwriting was erratic, but precise, as if the urgency in his mind was fighting against his need to get every detail right. Mary sat cross-legged on the stained carpet, her knees bouncing anxiously, chewing at her thumbnail, her eyes never leaving the ink that was giving form to their unthinkable plan. There was no guesswork here, no wild improvisation. They were methodical, clinical, a terrifying parody of students preparing for an exam, except the subject wasn't math or history. It was death. John flipped to a page where he had drawn an outline of Maria's house. He traced the kitchen window with his finger. "Here," he muttered, half to himself, half to Mary. "She always leaves it open, right? When she's cooking?" Mary nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yeah, almost always." Her fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve. He scribbled an arrow pointing toward the window, labeling it entry if front door locked. Then another arrow toward the side gate. Main entrance. Unlocked at midnight. He paused, tapping the pen against his lip, then scribbled a rough X in the hallway near the bedrooms. This is where we do it. Less noise. No neighbors will hear from here." Another page showed an unsettling checklist. It was written in 2 columns, each task accompanied by a box waiting to be ticked off. Cloth? Check. Rope? Maybe. Duct tape? Buy more. Hammer? Backup if needed. Gloves? No fingerprints. Each item written not as a spontaneous thought, but as a necessity, an essential tool in the machinery of murder. Beside the list were doodles that made Mary's stomach knot, stick figures with lines drawn across their throats, an arrow pointing to the head with the word "hit here" scribbled underneath. There was even a mock clock drawn with segments shaded in, blocks of time marked for every step. Lucy out of the house, 10 mins. First strike, 2 mins max. Cleanup, 20 mins. It was horrifying how detached they sounded while discussing it. If she fights, John's pen tapped the hammer sketch. Then you hit, fast, right here. He jabbed his finger against the drawn figure's temple. And if that doesn't work, back of the head, again and again, until she's down. Mary swallowed hard but didn't flinch. Her eyes were glassy, her brain running in loops trying to process the fact that this was real now. Not a fantasy, not a joke. These weren't idle words sent through a phone in the middle of the night. These were instructions, directions, a manual for ending a life. John flipped to yet another page where he'd scribbled possible excuses, alibis, even a crude fake text drafted for Mary to send afterward. "Hey Mom, went to my friends. Back soon." A lie written in casual handwriting, as if it could somehow mask the fact that by the time that text was sent, Maria might already be gone. The more Mary stared at the pages, the more it felt like staring into a mirror that didn't reflect her anymore. This wasn't who she was supposed to be. This wasn't who she used to be. But the ink was dry, the plans were made, and every mark on the paper felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of the person she could never become again. The air inside the cramped living room felt heavier now, thicker, suffocating even, as if the walls themselves were closing in to bear witness to the darkness unfolding within them. The rain outside had slowed to a whisper, but the tension between Mary and John had only grown louder in its silence. Pages of their violent blueprint lay scattered across the coffee table, their jagged lines and cruel scribbles forming a map, not to freedom, but to destruction. But even with every brutal step drawn out, something unspoken lingered in the air. A quiet understanding between them that this thing they were about to do, might be bigger than the two of them could handle alone. John paced, gnawing on his thumbnail, his eyes darting back and forth between the window and the clock on the wall. Then, without warning, he muttered, more to himself than to Mary, "We're gonna need help." His voice wasn't frantic. It was steady, cold, calculated. The way someone might discuss fixing a flat tire rather than orchestrating a murder. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts with a grim familiarity until he stopped at one name. Smith. Mary's stomach twisted. She'd heard about Smith before. John's older brother. Older by a few years, but with a lifetime's worth of bad decisions already piled behind him. A name spoken in passing with a hint of caution, like a warning sign ignored until it's too late. He wasn't like John. Charming, playful, manipulative. Smith was rougher around the edges, someone who never cared to hide the rot beneath the surface. The call was brief. Low words. Quiet laughs. A strange mixture of casual and sinister that made Mary's skin crawl. When John hung up, he didn't explain anything, didn't ask if Mary was okay with it. He simply said, "He's coming, he's in." And just like that, the crime shifted. It was no longer two reckless teenagers tangled in a sick obsession. It was something bigger now, a conspiracy. A web being spun with more hands, more minds, and far more sinister intent. It wasn't long before a knock rattled the front door. Sharp, fast, impatient. John opened it without hesitation. Smith stepped inside like he owned the place, bringing with him a presence that was immediately suffocating. His frame was bulkier, his face older, but hardened in a way that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with the kind of life he'd lived. His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Mary with an expression that hovered somewhere between curiosity and indifference. "So, this the girl?" His voice was gravel, roughened by too many cigarettes and too little sleep. He smirked without warmth, glancing down at the mess of papers spread across the coffee table. "Damn, you two weren't kidding." There was no hesitation, no surprise, no flicker of moral doubt. He dropped onto the couch, leaned forward, and started reviewing the plans like he was being asked to help move a couch or fix a leak, not end a life. "All right," he said, tapping the sketch of the house layout with his finger. "You get the kid out first. Smart, less mess, less screaming." His finger traced the line that represented the hallway. "You corner her here, small space, she can't run." Mary sat frozen, watching him dissect the plan with a level of comfort that made her stomach knot. Every word out of his mouth dragged this nightmare further from some terrible idea scribbled on paper, and closer to reality. Smith wasn't here to talk them out of it. He wasn't here to ask if they were sure. He was here because he wanted to be. Because this was, in some twisted way, exciting for him. Easy. John nodded, matching his brother's energy. Exactly what I was thinking. Hit hard, hit fast, no dragging it out. Smith's grin stretched wider. Good, no hesitation. If she fights, we put her down. Quick. More hands. More weight behind the blade. Whatever line Mary had believed existed, one that maybe she could still back away from, had been wiped away completely. There was no going back now. Not with Smith involved. Not with this plan laid bare for a third pair of hands willing, eager to help carry it out. The sun had finally broken through the clouds by the time Mary stepped through the front gate, 4 full days after she had vanished. The storm that had drowned the city in relentless rain had passed, leaving behind puddles that reflected the bright sky in fractured pieces, as if the world itself was trying to look whole but couldn't quite pull it off. Her shoes splashed quietly against the wet pavement, but her footsteps carried no hesitation, no shame, no fear. Her hands were tucked into her jacket pockets, her face set in a blank expression that betrayed nothing of the darkness she carried back with her. She walked toward the house not like a child coming home, but like someone returning to finish what they started. Maria had barely slept since the day her daughter disappeared. Her eyes were swollen from the sting of unshed tears, her face drawn tight with worry and exhaustion. Every sound outside had her bolting to the window. Every ring of the phone made her hands shake. Days had passed without word, without a message, without a clue. Panic had evolved into dread, and dread had soured into a deep, suffocating fear that something terrible had happened. That maybe Mary was gone forever. That maybe she'd never get to hold her child again, no matter how strained things had become between them. So when Maria saw her daughter step into the yard, the relief came like a wave so powerful it buckled her knees. Her breath hitched. For a moment, everything else, every argument, every suspicion, every broken piece of their relationship, vanished. All that mattered was that her daughter was home. She rushed to the door, flinging it open, her voice cracking under the weight of pure, desperate love. "Mary? Oh my God, where have you been? I've been sick worrying. I thought something terrible." Mary stood there, letting her mother's words fall around her like meaningless noise. Her face softened just enough to pass for concern, maybe even guilt, though neither were real. She shrugged, lowering her gaze, masking the calculation behind her eyes. "I just needed to get away for a bit," she muttered. "I was with a friend. I'm fine." Maria didn't scold. Not now. Not after the endless nights pacing back and forth, imagining all the ways the world could have swallowed her daughter whole. She pulled Mary into a tight embrace, burying her face into her shoulder, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You're home. That's all that matters. You're home." She didn't see the way Mary's eyes stared over her shoulder, cold, distant, detached. Inside the house, everything appeared normal again. Lucy squealed with joy when she saw her sister and wrapped her tiny arms around her waist, oblivious to the invisible storm that now hovered inside their home. Maria busied herself in the kitchen, immediately returning to the comfort of cooking, her way of coping with fear and worry. She prepared Mary's favorite meal, chattering nervously, filling the silence with reassurances neither of them really believed. "We'll figure things out," Maria said. "We'll talk. We'll get through this." But the calm that settled over the house wasn't real. It was the quiet hum that always comes before something terrible breaks loose. It was the false peace that predators wear before they strike. Behind Mary's calm, blank eyes was no returning daughter. No lost child finally found. There was only the weight of what was coming, what was inevitable. Maria moved through the kitchen, humming softly, believing, foolishly, tragically, that the worst had passed. She had no idea she was living the final calm moments of her life. The sky had shifted by late afternoon, clouds thickening once more as if the world sensed what was about to unfold within the walls of that small, unassuming house. Shadows crept longer across the floor as the sun disappeared behind the dense cover of gray. The air inside felt heavier now, as though it was struggling to move, suffocating in its own silence. Mary sat at the kitchen table, watching her mother move around with practiced familiarity, stirring a pot on the stove, wiping the counter, humming softly as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything. Lucy skipped down the hallway with a handful of crayons, oblivious, her tiny bare feet pattering softly against the floor. She giggled to herself about something only children understand. Her world still filled with cartoons and coloring books. Unaware of the dark current swirling just beneath the surface of the home she thought was safe. Mary's eyes followed her little sister with a kind of detached calculation, like watching the hands of a clock move toward a moment she couldn't avoid. Her heart pounded, not with guilt, not with fear exactly, but with the suffocating pressure of the step she was about to take. The next move. The next irreversible step towards something so final, so monstrous, that it hardly felt real. She stood quietly, smoothing the front of her sweatshirt as she approached Lucy, forcing a smile, rehearsing the lines in her head before speaking them aloud. Her voice came out gentle, sweet, careful, the kind of voice that older sisters use when they're about to ask for a favor. "Hey, Lucy," she began, crouching down to meet her sister's wide, trusting eyes. "Can you do something for me? It's really important." Lucy tilted her head, blinking curiously. "What?" Mary swallowed back the lump in her throat. "Mom needs you to go to Mrs. Erickson's house. You know, across the street. She forgot to tell her something important. She needs you to ask her to come over real quick." Lucy's nose scrunched in confusion. "Why can't you go?" Mary forced a laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind Lucy's ear. "Because Mom asked me to help with something in the kitchen. She needs me here. Please, Luce, just run over and tell her. Say Mom asked, Tai." It was such a simple lie, so easy to say, so easy for a child to believe. Lucy nodded, as innocent as sunlight, oblivious to the trap hidden beneath her sister's soft tone. "Okay," she chirped, hopping toward the door without a second thought. She slipped on her little pink sandals, the ones with faded cartoon rabbits on the side, and twisted the doorknob. As the door swung open, the first gust of cool evening air spilled into the house. Lucy stepped out, glancing back with a smile. "I'll be right back," she called. Mary waved. "Thanks, Luce," her voice light, sweet, but hollow. "You're the best." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded far louder than it should have. Final. Complete. And as soon as the latch settled into place, the silence that followed felt like a vacuum sucking all the air out of the house. Gone was the gentle hum of a family. Gone was the laughter of a child. In its place was something else entirely. Inside, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a tomb, waiting to be sealed. The walls seemed to lean in closer, the corners darker, the air heavier, denser. Mary stood perfectly still for a moment, staring at the now closed door, her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The sound of Lucy's skipping footsteps outside grew fainter and fainter, fading into the distance until even that small thread of innocence vanished completely. And then, only the sound of breathing remained. 2 breaths, hers and her mother's, nothing else. The air inside the house shifted. The second Lucy's footsteps vanished beyond the gate. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that brought peace. It was suffocating, charged, heavy with the weight of something unspeakable about to unfold. Mary stood frozen for a moment, her fingers twitching at her sides, staring into the kitchen where Maria stood by the stove, humming softly, her back turned, oblivious. There was a strange disconnect, a surreal pause where everything felt dreamlike, as though the walls were suddenly made of glass, and Mary was watching herself from the outside. Her mother stirred the pot, completely unaware that these would be some of her final movements in this life. The soft clink of a spoon against the pot was the last ordinary sound before the storm inside Mary erupted. Her hands moved before her mind fully caught up, reaching for the cloth hidden under her sweatshirt, fingers wrapping it tighter, feeling the rough fabric between her palms. Her heartbeat thudded so violently that it drowned out every rational thought. In 3 quick steps, she was behind Maria. Without a word, Without warning, she flung the cloth over her mother's head, looping it around her neck, yanking it back with every ounce of strength her trembling body could muster. The gasp that escaped Maria's lips wasn't sharp. It was soft, almost confused. Her hands shot up instinctively, grabbing at the fabric that was crushing her windpipe. Nails digging in, scrambling to find leverage, to pull, to breathe. The pot clattered to the floor, boiling water spilling everywhere, splashing against cabinets, seeping into the cracks between the tiles. Maria's body twisted violently, her elbows jerking backward as she fought against the force choking the air from her lungs. Her feet slipped against the wet floor, but adrenaline kept her upright. Her hands clawed at Mary's wrists now, not the cloth, desperately trying to pry her daughter's fingers away to break free from this betrayal she couldn't yet comprehend. A guttural, gasping sound filled the room, half scream, half strangled breath. Maria slammed her back against the countertop, trying to dislodge the attacker she still hadn't fully processed, was her own child. Her head whipped backward, colliding with Mary's chin, forcing her grip to loosen just enough for Maria to gasp in a broken sliver of air. Furniture scraped violently against the floor as they crashed into the dining chairs. One toppled over with a deafening bang. The kitchen table shifted, a cup shattered, shards scattering like tiny knives across the tile. Maria tried to turn, tried to face her attacker, but Mary shifted her weight, pulling the cloth tighter, planting her knee against her mother's lower back for leverage. Maria's hands trembled, weakening, her nails raking against Mary's forearms, leaving angry, bleeding scratches that neither of them noticed. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish dragged out of water, desperate, terrified, betrayed. Her body bucked, kicked, slammed into cabinets, but Mary held on with a kind of grim determination that didn't belong to a 14-year-old. Her face was twisted, teeth gritted, muscles shaking, but her grip never fully broke. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into eternities. Every gasping choke, every desperate thrash felt like it lasted forever. Maria's face was turning red, then purple, her eyes bulging, her lips trembling, mouthing something. Maybe a plea, maybe her daughter's name? But no sound made it past the crushing grip of the cloth around her throat. Still, she fought. Her body refused to give up, even as her vision blurred and her legs started to buckle. Her hands flailed, knocking over the dish rack, sending plates crashing to the floor, a cacophony of breaking porcelain mixing with the horrible sounds of someone drowning in air they couldn't pull in. But as strong as Maria was, as desperately as her body clung to life, the struggle lasted far, far too long. Maria's strength, even as it faded, was terrifying. Her fight was primal, instinctive, the desperate battle of someone who simply refused to die. No matter how tight Mary pulled the cloth, no matter how long she held it, Maria wouldn't surrender her breath. Her hands clawed, kicked, shoved, her body slamming against cabinets, flipping chairs, gasping, choking, but still living. The grip that was supposed to steal her life was failing. Every muscle in Mary's arms screamed with exhaustion. Her breath came in sharp, frantic gasps of her own. Sweat pouring down her face, her vision blurred with the panic of realizing that this was taking too long. Far too long. From the corner of her eye, Mary caught the flash of motion. John. He had been standing there watching, waiting, unsure whether to intervene or let her finish what they had spent weeks planning. But now, seeing her falter, seeing Maria still struggling, still fighting, the mask of patience slipped from his face. Without a word, he turned, crossed the room, and reached for what they had both agreed was only ever a backup. The hammer. It lay against the counter, small, old, heavy. John's fingers wrapped around the handle like it belonged to him, like it had always belonged to this moment. The weight of it felt certain, final. He crossed the room with no hesitation, no warning, raising it above his head. There was a beat. A frozen second where everything felt suspended. The world, the storm outside, the chaos inside. It all fell silent. And then the hammer came down. The first strike landed with a sickening crunch against the side of Maria's skull. A sound that didn't belong in the world of normal things. Bone cracking. Flesh splitting. Maria's hands flew from the cloth to her head, her knees buckling, her mouth open in a silent scream that never made it out. Blood sprayed against the cabinets, thick, dark, painting the pale tiles with something unspeakably violent. But it didn't end there. It didn't stop. John's hands trembled, not with hesitation, but with adrenaline. The hammer rose again, then crashed down onto the back of her head. A wet, crunching thud echoed through the house. Her body convulsed, collapsing halfway, but instinct kept her trying to crawl, to move, even as her arms trembled under the weight of her failing body. Mary stood back, watching, her chest heaving, her hands still tangled in the twisted cloth but now limp, useless. Her eyes were wide, locked onto the scene in front of her, but her face was blank. Shocked, horrified, or maybe simply hollow. She didn't know anymore. John struck again, and again. The sound grew duller as bone gave way, as the skull beneath cracked and caved in. Blood splattered across the floor, across the walls. Warm droplets even speckled Mary's cheek, but she didn't wipe them away. Her mother's body jerked under each blow until, slowly, her arms stopped moving. Her legs went slack. Her breath, the gasping, strangled noise that had once filled the room, faded into a gurgling whisper, then nothing at all. Still, John didn't stop. Not right away. As if afraid that she might somehow rise again, that some fragment of life could still be clinging to her broken frame. Another hit. Then another. Until finally, the nightmare bled out into silence. Maria's body lay twisted on the tile, her head an unrecognizable ruin of shattered bone, torn skin, and pooling blood that spread like a dark, viscous shadow, swallowing the floor. The hammer slipped from John's hand with a dull clang, rolling a few inches before settling, now stained, now part of the crime forever. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the relentless ticking of the wall clock, oblivious, indifferent, counting the seconds of a life that no longer existed. The air reeked of metal and something worse, something thick and suffocating that clung to their skin and their hair like smoke from a fire that wouldn't burn out. The blood was everywhere. It wasn't like in the movies, where a clean strike left a neat little pool. No, this was real. It had sprayed, splattered, streaked across the walls, across the floor, across them. Maria's body lay motionless, twisted awkwardly, her head a brutal, caved-in mess of bone, hair, and blood. Her eyes were half-lidded, staring blankly at the ceiling that no longer mattered. For a long time, they just stood there, frozen, staring, breathing heavy, their chests rising and falling in shallow, frantic gasps as the reality of what they had done pulsed louder than the ticking clock. But panic was already threading itself into every corner of Mary's brain. This wasn't how it was supposed to look. This wasn't the neat, quiet disappearance they'd mapped out in shaky lines and stick figure diagrams. This was chaos. Loud, messy, unforgiving. John was the first to snap back into motion. "We've got to clean it, now! Get it cleaned! Get it cleaned!" he repeated, almost chanting under his breath like if he said it enough, it would undo what they had done. He ran to the kitchen sink, yanking open the cupboard beneath it, pulling out every half-used cleaning product he could find. Bleach, old bottles of detergent, grimy sponges that smelled like mildew. Mary grabbed towels, rags, anything fabric, not caring that half of them were patterned with Lucy's favorite cartoon characters, or embroidered with her mother's initials. Everything was fair game now. Everything was sacrificed to the mess they'd made. They soaked up what they could, pressing cloth to the ever-growing puddle as though sheer willpower might stop the tide. The sound was sickening, the squelch of blood being pressed into fabric, the slap of soaked rags hitting tile. They scrubbed at the walls, at the cabinets, at the floor, their hands shaking, slipping in the mixture of water, bleach, and blood. But it became obvious within minutes that no amount of scrubbing was going to erase the splatter stains that had seeped into every corner. Blood had found the cracks between the tiles. It had seeped beneath the fridge, smeared beneath the table legs, splattered into the fibers of the curtains. Everywhere they looked, there it was. A reminder. A fingerprint of violence that couldn't be wiped clean. John yanked open the back door, staggering outside, dragging the soaked towels into the lawn, tossing them into a pile like garbage, his hands stained crimson all the way to the wrists. "We dump her," he hissed. Somewhere. Anywhere. No body, no crime. But it wasn't that simple. The body was heavy, so much heavier than they imagined. Dead weight wasn't just a phrase, it was a cruel reality. Maria's body resisted their tugging like it was trying to stay anchored to the home she had built, to the life they were now trying to erase. Her arms flopped limply, her broken head tilting grotesquely with every jolt of movement, leaving fresh streaks wherever it touched. Mary gagged, bile burning the back of her throat as she realized they had no real plan for this part. The sketches, the diagrams, the notes, none of it accounted for the way a lifeless body shifts, the way blood refuses to stop leaking, the way death isn't clean or silent. They wrapped her in bed sheets, tying them awkwardly with extension cords, duct tape, whatever they could grab. But no matter how tightly they bound her, blood seeped through, staining the fabric in deep, ugly blotches that screamed louder than any scream could. The plan was simple in theory: make it look like she vanished, disappeared without a trace, as though she had simply walked out and never come back. But now, staring at the crime scene around them, both of them knew something ugly and undeniable. Blood doesn't stay hidden. It creeps, it stains, it lingers. And no matter how much they scrubbed, no matter how they staged, the house itself was already soaked in the truth. The illusion of disappearance was a fragile one. A fantasy spun by two teenagers who believed that death was as simple as erasure, that a body hidden beneath fabric and frantic bleach scrubbing could rewrite reality. But reality doesn't bend so easily. Truth has sharp edges, and the smell of blood has a way of cutting through lies faster than anyone anticipates. Even before the crime unfolded, the police were already watching closely. Maria's missing child report, filed just days earlier when Mary vanished without warning, had triggered an alert. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to run off for a day or two, but something about Maria's voice that day had stuck with the officer who took the report. The desperation wasn't performative, it was primal. The kind of terror only a mother carries when her instincts scream that something is wrong. Not just rebellious wrong, but dangerously, irreversibly wrong. So when Mary reappeared 4 days later, as if nothing had happened, walking through her front gate with her hands shoved in her pockets and an empty explanation sitting on her lips, it raised more red flags than she could ever imagine. Her story didn't fit. Her eyes didn't fit. Her mother's instinct might not have seen through the lie in that moment, blinded by relief, but the officers had seen it before, too many times. They started piecing the timeline together quickly. Maria had filed a missing persons report on Mary. Then Mary had suddenly come home. And now, almost eerily on cue, Maria wasn't answering her phone. Her job reported her absent without notice. Neighbors hadn't seen her. Her kitchen window remained open. Her front curtains drawn exactly the same for days. By the second day of Maria's eerie silence, officers were knocking on the door. The first knock went unanswered. The second was met with a fumbling, delayed shuffle from inside. Mary opened it, her face pale but calm, a little too calm. Her words were stiff, her smile forced. She said her mother wasn't home, that maybe she went out early, maybe to a friend's. But she couldn't name the friend. Couldn't explain why Maria's purse was still sitting on the table, why her shoes were still lined by the door. The officer's eyes scanned past her, and what they noticed was immediate. The faint scent of bleach. Not the normal whiff of someone doing routine cleaning, but the sharp, aggressive stench of overuse. The scent of desperation trying to cover something bigger. The warrant came fast. The officers returned within hours, this time with backup. Mary barely resisted. She stood stiff at the doorway, hands trembling at her sides as they crossed the threshold and flooded into the house. They didn't have to search long. A streak of brownish red stained the grout line under the fridge. Smears hidden behind the laundry door. A small, telltale pool of dried blood that someone had missed, nestled in the corner beneath the dining table where the shadows didn't quite reach. In the back room, the sheets, heavy, stained, poorly wrapped, revealed what they already suspected. Maria. Her body, her broken skull caved in, her face barely recognizable beneath the brutal aftermath of what had been done to her. The officers moved with grim efficiency. Handcuffs snapped around Mary's wrists. John, dragged from his house less than an hour later, went down fighting, yelling protests that no one listened to. His screams were hollow, pointless. The illusion of vanished collapsed entirely. Neighbors lined the streets, peering from behind curtains, whispering in horror as they watched the police drag two teenagers, a daughter and her boyfriend, into waiting squad cars. There were no more lies to be told now. No more games of pretending someone had simply disappeared. Justice was knocking, and this time, it wasn't leaving empty-handed. The walls of the interrogation room were sterile and cold, designed to suffocate anyone inside with their emptiness. There was no artwork, no clock ticking in the corner to mark the passage of time. Just blank, pale walls that pressed in, indifferent to whoever sat beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. A steel table sat between the detectives and the girl who now occupied the chair with a posture far too relaxed for someone being questioned about murder. Mary sat back, arms crossed, her eyes drifting lazily over the scuffed surface of the table as though she was bored. Not scared, not nervous. Not what anyone would expect from a 14-year-old accused of killing her own mother. No trembling lip. No tears welling behind frightened eyes. Just a face carved from something cold, something hollow. Across the hall, in a nearly identical room, John mirrored her demeanor. Legs spread, fingers drumming rhythmically against the metal, leaning back like he was waiting for someone to offer him a drink rather than press him for the truth. His smirk never faded, even as the detectives laid out the details. The body, the blood, the texts, the drawings. All of it. Neither of them denied anything. Not once. There were no protests of innocence, no fake cries or half-hearted denials. When the officer leaned forward and asked the first question, "Where is Maria?" Mary shrugged like they were discussing a misplaced textbook. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "In the back room, or what's left of her." The detective paused, absorbing the brutality of her answer, before asking, "And how did that happen?" Mary didn't even flinch. Her fingers tapped the table like she was keeping time with a song only she could hear. "We choked her with the cloth, but she wouldn't die." Her lips twitched, but not with regret, with irritation. "So, we used the hammer. John hit her. I helped." The room grew heavier. The officers exchanged glances, not out of confusion, but disbelief at how clinical, how casual her words were. This wasn't the voice of someone retelling a nightmare that had spiraled out of control. This was recounting a chore, a task completed. Over in John's room, the same play unfolded. When asked why would he do this? He leaned forward, grinning like it was all some dark joke that only he was in on. Because she was in the way. Simple as that. Always nagging her. Always controlling her. We wanted her gone. So, we made her gone. The detective pressed, voice low, measured. "Do you feel anything about what you did?" John's smirk widened. "No, why would I?" Neither of them cracked. Not under pressure. Not when shown photos of Maria's mangled body. Not when the officers read their own text messages back to them. The ones where they joked about how easy it would be, how much better life would be once the problem was solved. There were no tears, no apologies, not even when Lucy's name was brought up. The little sister who had unknowingly skipped off down the street while her mother's murder unfolded behind closed doors. Mary didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed flat, her mouth unmoved. "I don't regret it," she said finally, her voice so hollow it chilled the room. "She deserved it." The detectives stared, stunned, but there was nothing left to say. The confessions poured out not like burdens being unloaded, but like bragging, as though the act itself had been less about killing and more about proving they could. No guilt, no remorse, just silence. And the ticking realization that the monsters they were facing weren't hiding under beds or behind masks. They were sitting right there, in plain view. The house that once echoed with the sounds of family, the clatter of breakfast plates, the soft hum of cartoons from the living room, and the innocent giggles of a little girl, stood hollow now. Silent. Lifeless. Where photos once hung proudly on the walls, crime scene tape now fluttered in the wind. The laughter that once filled those rooms was gone, replaced with a suffocating emptiness that no amount of time would ever truly erase. The neighbors walked past without looking, without daring to glance too long, as if the ground itself was now cursed. And in the middle of it all was Lucy. A little girl whose world was dismantled in a way no child should ever experience. Orphaned not by accident, not by illness, but by the hands of her own sister. The sister she had hugged just days earlier. The sister she had trusted when told, "Go to the neighbor, Mom needs you." Lucy would never forget that. She would never forget the sound of the door closing behind her, nor the creeping sensation later when the truth unfolded, that the very person who was supposed to protect her had instead destroyed her world. Social services arrived quickly. They had to. A child left in the aftermath of a murder this brutal couldn't be left adrift. A woman from child welfare knelt down to Lucy's eye level, offered her a stuffed bear, and spoke in soft, rehearsed tones meant to comfort. But there are no words in the world soft enough to smooth over what Lucy had lost. No gentle hand steady enough to erase the image of flashing red and blue lights that had swallowed her home, of police officers carrying her sister away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, the trial began. It wasn't just a court case, it was a media storm. News vans lined the streets, reporters whispering into microphones, their voices shaking with a mixture of horror and disbelief as they fed the details to a shocked nation. A daughter murders her own mother, with the help of her boyfriend, in cold blood. Headlines screamed words like chilling, unthinkable, and a family torn apart by evil. Photos of Mary circulated everywhere. The fresh-faced teenage girl who, to anyone looking from the outside, looked like any other 14-year-old. But inside those photos was the reflection of something far darker, far colder than anyone ever expected. John, being legally an adult at 19, faced the full brunt of the justice system. His sentencing was swift and unforgiving. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for decades. The judge's voice was steady, but even she could not hide the tremor of disgust woven into her final words. A crime so cruel, so calculated, that it defies the very meaning of family and humanity. Mary, younger, was treated differently under the law, but not spared. She was sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed for a minor under Swedish law, detained until the age of 21 in a high-security juvenile facility. But with a special note, upon turning 21, her case would be reviewed again, with the possibility of transferring her to an adult prison based on her psychological evaluations, which painted a grim picture of a child entirely devoid of empathy. The community never recovered. How could it? Parents who once felt safe letting their children play freely now gripped them tighter. Locking doors felt less about keeping strangers out, and more about fearing what could grow inside. People whispered at supermarkets. Teachers glanced over their classrooms with new, uneasy eyes. The illusion that evil was always somewhere out there shattered completely. Lucy was placed with extended family, distant relatives who lived hours away. They tried their best, new toys, new school, new bedroom. But none of it could patch the hole torn straight through her tiny heart. Night after night, she would lay awake staring at the ceiling, whispering to no one, "Why, Mary? Why?" And no answer ever came. The world took notice. Documentaries were filmed. Crime podcasts dissected every detail. Psychologists sat on televised panels arguing how this could happen. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Was she born this way or made this way? But for all the endless debate, one truth rose, undeniable above everything else. The scariest monsters aren't always strangers lurking in dark alleys. They don't always come with fangs or masks or threats whispered from the shadows. Sometimes, the scariest monsters wear the face of someone you love. Someone who lives under your own roof, sleeps in the room next to yours, smiles at the dinner table. Sometimes, the monster comes from within your own home. This wasn't a crime of passion, but a crime of calculation. A crime that began with a text.